Hello, everybody, and welcome to our Bluebeam Review for Site Logistics webinar. Today, we'll be talking about cost efficiency, site safety, calibrations, and markup tracking. We're very excited to have Ari Rejtman, our AEC technical specialist and Bluebeam certified instructor, here with us today to lead this presentation. So, Ari, go ahead and jump over to that next slide. We'll talk about some logistics real quick, and then we'll go ahead and get started. Okay, so some important information for you all. All attendees will be muted during this presentation. You can go ahead and send us your questions via the chat box or the questions box throughout the presentation, and we will be answering those at the very end. This webcast will be recorded for future viewing. You should receive a link for that in an email, and it'll also actually be on our YouTube channel later today, as well as on our website. Bluebeam Revu training is available, and you can contact us if you would like more information about that. Or if there's anything else you'd like information on, your software needs, anything of that nature, you can definitely reach out to us by giving us a call at 305-445-6480 or emailing us at info@ddscad.com. Okay, so without further ado, Ari, go ahead and take it away.
Thank you very much, Alan. Hi, everybody. My name is Ari, of course. I'm a Bluebeam certified instructor, and today we're going to be learning about quite a few interesting things that are all related to site logistics, including how to make sure that we're being efficient with our costs and not wasting money. So we're going to be able to keep track of all of our different materials and assets through the markups list and other means in Bluebeam Revu. We're also going to look at measurements and understand how we can not only set preset scales and custom scales, but we can also calibrate measurements so that if we don't have a scale, but we do know at least one linear measurement on site, we'll be able to basically figure out what the generalized scale is for the drawing. Then, like I mentioned, we'll use that markups list to sort our measurements and make sure that everything is kept track of. That way, nothing is wasted and nothing is lost in the sauce, as they say. And we're also going to be looking at what statuses are. So statuses are a great way to keep track of things, and they're semi-permanent, so they're a good way to also improve accountability. And not only can we use statuses on local files, but we can actually use them in studio sessions as well. So you can see that, job site safety can be enhanced by basically allowing us to collaborate together on studio projects and sessions so that everybody has access to the same information and that no part of the site is basically remaining hazardous, and some people know it and other people don't, for example. So we're going to make sure that that does not happen, and I'll show you guys how to do that today. So let's do it. We're going to get right into Bluebeam Revu. I'm going to switch into it now. So our first topic, essentially, let me go back and make sure that I get this right, is basically we're going to be looking at measurements first, and we're going to see how measurements work. And I'm also going to give you guys a brief overview of cost analysis and quantity takeoff so that you guys can basically see how we can start to keep track of not only how large certain measurements are, but how much they're going to cost depending on what material is being represented by the measurement. We can initially do this by going to the ruler panel right here on the right side. And this is where we can start to see some of our measurements are in this list at the top here. We have a drop down as well that has some hidden ones depending on how large your side panel is. And you can always move your mouse over this edge here and stretch them to make it a little bit bigger if you needed to. So I'll make mine slightly bigger just for today. Then, like I mentioned earlier, we have preset scales and custom scales. So if you know the scale and if the scale is specified in your drawing, no problem. You can just click on this drop down here, and we have so many different scales here: architectural scales, surveying scales, and engineering scales. So they're all here. These are the most common ones. And let's say that we want to do 1 inch equals 500 feet, for example. Then what we can do now is go to the custom section. So we can go to custom. And now we can type in anything we want equal to anything we want. The only limitation is the units here in the first tab are basically inches, centimeters, or millimeters. So you can't have feet equal another portion of feet, which makes sense, of course. So we can have 1 inch equal 500 feet if we wanted to. We can also, of course, have it equal to yards, for example, and then we can even go metric if we need to as well. So there's many different ways of setting up any kind of custom scale that you need to. If you also need to, you can actually set up a separate Y scale. So once this is chosen, now you can choose a separate Y scale, whether it's preset or custom, doesn't really matter. And that way you can basically get very, very creative depending on certain kinds of surveying scales where they have a larger X scale compared to the Y scale, for example, in order to fit diagrams that are representing roads, for example, on the page. So we don't have a separate Y scale today. Now I'm going to show you all how we can determine the scale without using presets and custom if we don't even know what our scale is. And just so you all know, a scale is required in order for us to actually be able to create measurements. So if you try to create a measurement without one, it's not going to let you. So now I'm going to use calibrate. It's going to ask us to select 2 points of a known dimension. So I'm going to do that right now. I'm just going to zoom in, and I'm going to use maybe one of these little grid lines right here. So I think grid line 6 and 7 should be great. It has a known dimension here. Even if I didn't see the dimension on the drawing, if I knew the length of a wall, for example, or some other asset that I knew the exact dimension of, I can calibrate that. So this desk would be a decent example if it was large enough, and of course, if we could use it. It doesn't have to be a certain size, but I would typically recommend something that's about 1 foot or larger should work. So let's use this relatively easy grid line section here. I'm going to zoom in and click on this grid or this intersection right here. And then I'm going to zoom out, pan to the right, and I'm going to click on this intersection as well to choose my 2 points. This dialog is interesting because when we get to this dialog, it initially will automatically populate this number on the left side. And as I was training clients throughout the years, I've noticed that sometimes everybody's number here is a little bit different based on where they place their snaps, and because you can see that it's rounding to about, it seems like, how many decimal places is that? 6 decimal places. So that's quite interesting. So we can round this to about 3.75 inches, equals a foot. Now, this is not really correct because this number here is highlighted in blue, and Revu wants us to actually type in what the measurement was that we just measured. That's why that measurement is important. So we now know that this is a 30-foot dimension based on the length that we have, and we can pretend that it was a wall that we already knew the dimension of. So 30 feet. And when I'm done, I have a few ways to input the data. Right now, you can see our cursor is still flashing here. And a really fast way is to click on this drop down to the right once, and then again. That way, Revu inputs the data and puts the -0 inches right there. Now that we've done that, we actually have a scale. 3.75 inches equals 30 feet is a scale, and it is correct. However, this is not a typical scale. So if you want to see if the scale of the drawing is a typical one, and you want your scales to equal 1 foot in this box right here, then all you have to do is do some math. 30 feet divided by itself equals 1. And therefore, 3.75 divided by 30 equals 0.125. Now we know that 0.125 equals 1 foot. To convert 0.125 to a fraction, we know that that is 1/8 of an inch, and therefore 1/8 of an inch equals a foot. We can now go to preset and swap to 1/8 of an inch equals a foot right here. We've now proven that the scale is this one right here, and that's how we can use calibration to do so. Next, we have our precision. This will determine how many fractions or decimal places we're going to see with our measurements. So the lower the number, the more decimal places. So we could round to the nearest 32nd of an inch, or I believe it's about 5 decimal places for this choice right here. And most people like to round to about 2 or 3 decimal places, or to about 1/4 or 1/8 of an inch. Just be careful. The larger the number, the less accurate your measurements are going to be because they're going to be rounding up. So you have to be very careful when using precision. So I do recommend using the smaller precisions most of the time. For today, let's use 1/16 of an inch. That's a pretty balanced one, and it will show, I believe, 4 decimal places. Now we're going to click apply scale when we're done. For me, I could click cancel since I've done this already, but I'll do apply scale. That way our precision right here has been changed, and we can always change it whenever we want to. A precision is global, so you cannot change the precision per markup. So as you can see here, I have some markups here that have some data, and you can see that it's showing 4 decimal places worth of data for some of them. Once I swap this to half, for example, now it's only showing 1 decimal place for each of the decimals right here. And the fractions and decimals, they're all interchangeable. And 1/32 is showing a few more, and it's trying to round down instead of up compared to 1/16. So it's very, very similar though, and it more so affects fractions and decimals. All right, so that's how we can do calibrations and measurements, and that's how we can get ourselves prepared. Now what I'm going to do is show you all how to make a measurement and then assign some materials to it. And I'm going to quickly go over cost analysis because I can do a whole webinar on cost analysis. So I'm going to brush over it today. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use an area tool. I'm going to use it for my shortcut up here. I could also go to tools and measure, and the full list of measurements is here. I recommend using this once and making your perfect area, and then eventually saving it to your tool chest. Let me switch to another profile. I was actually training some clients, so I was using a profile that we made together, but I'm going to switch back to my profile because I have my own tools that I've already prepared. So you can see the tool chest here. It's beginning to load. You can see some empty boxes here are looking a little funky. And my tool chest here is empty for just a second. So it looks like my program is loading a lot of data, and there it is. Now my tool chest is now populated. So I can use any of the areas that I have in the tool chest. And as I mouse over them, I can see important data about them. I actually have 3 different kinds of areas here. This one does not have a fill, these 2 do, and this one also has a dotted border around it. So they're all a little bit different. I'm going to use this one. It's a little bit easier to see the data with it. And I'm just going to create it right on the screen. So we can see that the area is here, and it's automatically been assigned as a concrete area by its label. We're going to select it, and then we're going to go to the properties panel, the gear wheel in the upper right side. And we're going to look and see that by default, I've already set the label for this right here. All measurements can have labels, while markups do not have labels. So this text box right here, you can see the label section underneath subject does not exist. So the label is quite useful. We can use that to sort and organize things, but that doesn't mean that we've given it a material. That doesn't mean that we can do cost analysis. There's a little bit more to do for that. Before I get into that, I want to show you all how I'm able to display all of this data and explain what all of this means, because the length, width, height, and depth are very different in this program compared to what we're typically used to when looking at certain kinds of construction documents. I'm going to scroll down about halfway, and we're going to see that there's a little section here that allows me to not only show segment values, so I can turn this off, and now I just see the lines around my area, and on, and I'm going to leave them on to explain how width and height work, basically, along with the length. And then I have show caption right here. Show caption is great because I can click on edit here, and I can display all of this data. So you can actually use the area tool to display the volume and wall area, and you don't need to make separate measurements in order to show that kind of data and to quantify that data. This allows you to save up the amount of markups you have in the markups list so that it's not too cluttered. And this is why I like to use the area tool. It displays a lot of information compared to the perimeter and polylength tool and other tools like that. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you all, or explain to you all, what do all of these numbers mean? Well, you may have noticed that the width is now basically matching the horizontal length of this area, and the height is matching the vertical length of this area. So height is not a z-axis, the height of a wall or the height of a door, for example. That's where depth comes in. The depth, it's actually considered the height, and basically that's how we use it in Bluebeam Revu. And if you've been doing the math in your head, you can add up all 4 sides of this area and you'll get the length. Therefore, the length is the perimeter of the entire area tool. And then, of course, we have area and volume and wall area. And if your depth was set to 0, you would not see volume or wall area because they would equal 0. And if something equals 0, it would be hidden in Revu. How do you assign depth to a markup or to a measurement? Well, all we have to do is select it. We can go to our ruler panel right here, and we can see that there's a depth section right here. So if I change this, let's say that maybe we're going to pour some really thick concrete. It's going to be about 1 foot, for example. I'm going to change my units here from inches to feet. And now all that data changed here. So our wall area and our volume is completely different. Now I'm going to change it back, and you guys can, let's memorize the volume, about 693 cubic feet. I'm going to go to 6, change this to inches, and there we go. We've essentially cut it right in half with our volume. And so that's how that works. And that's how we can very quickly change a few parameters and get the data that we need without having to do any manual math. Now, the next part that I want to show you is back in properties. If we scroll almost all the way down, we're going to go to the custom section right here. And this is where you can have custom columns that could have material columns, for example, and other things. And what I've done is that I've already set default materials that are assigned to markups as soon as I make them. I don't have to go and assign each markup a specific material, which is nice. So concrete is my most common one. I actually separate between concrete exterior and concrete interior. We can't see the interior one here because I've assigned a specific subject to this, and the other materials that I have the same subject. This way, if I have 1,000 materials, but I have a certain subject that allows maybe 5 materials to be chosen, I don't have to go through the entire list of 1,000 materials. I can just see the 5 that I need and choose those ones. And so that's how that works. The same for wall paint. I have an interior one as well, and I keep them separate on purpose. So if I change the subject, then the materials here will change as well. Now, what if I change the material? Before I change it here, I'm actually going to open up my markups list and show you all what we're actually quantifying and what the cost is for concrete. So I'm going to just click on the 3 dots and 3 lines on the bottom left side. And now I'm essentially going to scroll to the right here, and you can see that I have all of my custom column data right here. Here is my material column. I also made one at a convention recently, so don't mind me. And we have this one, and I'm just going to extend it out a bit until a number appears next to the material. Concrete is 3 of whatever currency for 1 unit. So typically $3 per cubic foot. You could also, of course, do square feet and feet, of course. And therefore, we have the cost analysis columns here. Let me make them a little bit bigger so we can actually see what we're quantifying. So it'll cost about $2,000 to just fill out the floor with concrete without any depth involved. There's no quantities being done here, so I'm just going to collapse that for a second. And we have the volume right here. That's very pertinent to concrete. So 6-inch concrete, the area is 693. You do the math, and basically the cost per unit is right here. So you can see how that works. And we're going to make this larger as well, the wall area. So we can pretend that these are 6-inch tall walls, pretty tall, I guess. And so it's actually not too expensive to basically make 6-inch tall concrete around the entire section here. Although perhaps that is pretty expensive, depending on your cost for concrete. So mine just happens to be, like I said, $3 per cubic foot. And then if there was a length involved, we would get that quantity, and we do. I just made that a little too big. Whoops. Let me try and make that bigger again, but not way too big. Okay, never mind. And we can see here that the length is being calculated by the overall perimeter multiplied by the cost per unit. I'm going to quickly show you all how I made this, and then we're going to move on to other parts of the presentation that are more focused on site logistics. But it looks like we're making pretty good time. So I'm going to go to the markups list drop down right here, mouse over columns right here. This is where I can choose certain columns. What if I want to reorder them? Well, I have way too many, so I'm actually just going to use these arrows, and I'm going to essentially go to manage columns here. And this is where I can start to turn off certain columns here. For example, I can go and turn off all of those columns that I was making during that convention here. Now, for some reason, they're not turning off. Interesting. I'll have to look into why. It seems like because they're custom columns, I would probably have to perhaps delete them. And if I can't turn them off here, that's okay, because I can go back to markups list and columns, and I think I can turn them off just like that. There we go. That's much better. So if you have a custom column, you can't turn it off in the actual columns dialog, but in this list you can. So this way I can make things a bit cleaner and not have so many columns to deal with. Now I'm going to go back. I'm going to mouse down right here and click on Manage Columns. And now I can start to turn off certain things that I don't need. I believe that now that these are off, they cannot be turned off quite yet. So it looks like the column, if it exists and it's a custom column, it does need to be left on. And that is good to know for the future. So let's move on to the custom column section. This is the main reason why I'm showcasing this, to see the different kinds of materials. So now that I'm here, I'm actually going to delete these manually. Much better. And now they will be essentially gone. And that's how you can really truly delete a custom column. Obviously, if you make a custom column, you intend to use them. So that's why it was hard to delete them in the first 2 dialogues. So that's why I demonstrated that. So now that I have my cost analysis columns here, let me show you how I made the materials one. Basically, you can add as many materials as you need and use a choice column. So I could click on add, but I'll just click on modify. It's basically the same concept, because then you just give your column a name, you use the choice type in this list, and then you can add your materials. Let's say I wanted to add one right now. So I can click on add right here. Perhaps there's a different kind of paint that's very expensive. So I did learn recently that there is eggshell, which is a type of paint. So we can actually include that. I could actually give it a subject or leave it blank. Leaving it blank allows me to assign this material to any markup regardless of subject, which is very flexible. Like I mentioned earlier, once you have thousands of materials, or hundreds of them even, you probably want to assign subjects to each of them and assign those subjects to your markups as well, so that you don't have to choose between all 100 or all 1,000. The next important step is to assign a numeric value. So I can click on this, and let's say that the cost of eggshell paint per 1 square foot is, and for paint, I believe this is going to be rather expensive. Let's say it's going to be just 0.75 cents. And I believe that the 0 on the front may be necessary. Let's try without and see what happens. And then if I want to use this material more often than not, I can set it as my default. I'm going to click OK. Looks like that worked, and we're going to scroll down and see our material that we just made. And there it is. I put the 0 in front for us, so we don't have to type that. That'll save us some time. I can also reorder these, so I can put this material at the top of my list if I do use it more often than not. And then, of course, I can set my defaults if I need to. And you can see here that defaults for certain kinds of measurements are already set for these 2 right here. So that's essentially how we can make our materials. Then we can go to the cost analysis portion right here, and we can start to quantify all of this stuff. So The material is ready. Now, let's say that I wanted to calculate the volume. I would select it. I can click on add, of course, but I'll just modify mine and show you how I made it. This is a formula column. I gave it a specific name, of course, and the expression is very easy. I'm going to remake this from scratch with you all. All you have to do is type in any letter, and it's going to give you the variables list. This list not only has variables that come from Bluebeam Revu, but all of our custom columns, so the cost analysis columns, the material column are here. And if we keep scrolling down, we have some functions that come from calculus. So we have the summation and pi and a few other things that are way beyond my understanding, but I do remember them from when I used to take math in school. So moving on, we're going to double click on the variable that we want, which is going to be the material column. We space and then use the star above the number 8. So shift and then 8 to get that star. Space again, any letter that we want. So I'll just say the letter E, for example. It'll immediately go to whatever variable starts with E. So it looks like the first one was our constant for summation. And now I'm going to multiply it by whatever that variable needs to be multiplied by, of course. So material, for doing cost analysis volume, we just multiply it by volume. Very, very easy. So just going to double click on volume, and there it is. Then I change my format from normal to currency. I have 2 decimal places for the cents, and then the currency symbol is enabled when you switch it to currency, and I can switch it to most of the major ones around the world, including dollars. We can include our materials and our costs in totals so that if we have multiple of the same type, they're going to add themselves up in the markups list automatically. I'm going to demonstrate that right now. So that's essentially how we can make formula columns, and the same concept applies to floor area. It's just material times area. And wall area. Wall area is a special variable that combines the height and the depth. So that's quite nice. Or excuse me, the length and the depth. Because even though the length is the perimeter, it is still, taking that into consideration. The height itself is just the horizontal or the vertical length. And then pipe length is very simple, material times length. So very, very easy stuff. And the count one is simply material times count. So if you want to count how many there is of something, you can do so as well. So that's how these columns work. I'm going to click OK. And now that's updated. I've gotten rid of those extra columns that I had. And now you can see that the bold number here is a total. So that means if we look on the left, we have all of these markups that are under my name because I'm sorting by author right now. And so as a result, anything under my name is now being added up together. And we have lots of different areas here. And you can see all of the individual numbers here. And they're all being added up. So 600, 315, and 117 equals about 1,125. And that's how that works. That's cost analysis in a very brief nutshell. I'm not going to focus on that too much now. And at the end, if anybody has any questions and wants to follow up on more details about cost analysis, please let me know. One little detail that is important is when you're starting to do this, the custom columns that you make, they're stuck to the PDF. They are not part of the program, so you can't just make them once and use them on any PDF. Instead, you'll need to export them. You can only export all of them all at once. So you can click on that here. And it's a special XML file, which is compatible with Excel as well. And then when you're ready, open up the file that you want to use them in and use the import button right here. All right, let's go back to our presentation and see what is next. The markups list. I'm glad that I showcased it already. Let me talk about statuses, and we're going to segue into Studio because we need to set up our statuses ahead of time. That's very, very important. Let's do that now. Statuses are also tied to each PDF. So you can have a template PDF, and then you can essentially go to your status column, make sure it's turned on. So you can go to markups list columns, make sure that that status one is turned on. Where is it? Right there. Perfect. And then there's a special button next to statuses, which is essentially the settings button for statuses. You'll see this button in Studio as well when you're trying to modify the settings of a Studio project or a Studio session. So I'm going to click on this. I can click on Manage Status right now. And this is fantastic because now what I can do is I can look at any of the custom statuses that I've made here. And you can see that I've made quite a few. And you can essentially change the models, which is essentially just the status group name. And then each status can have its own states. That is what the actual status is called. It's really called a state, and we can do that. So why don't I make a new one? So I'm going to call this one Site Logistics Statuses. Perfect. I believe I spelled all of that correctly. Very good. Now I'm going to add states for it. So I'm going to click on Add right here. And this is where I can give each state a name. So let's do approved. And we can even have extra text. Basically, this means that once you set the status for something, and let's say that that markup that you set it for is a text box, you can actually change the text of that markup if you wanted to. That's what this text portion means. So it's a dynamic way to automatically change text based on whatever status is assigned to it. I typically don't use this, so I'm going to leave it blank for now. And for now, we can just see how the status, we basically just give the status a name, and the markup text itself, we typically don't want to delete that, especially if it's important information that we want to keep track of. So we're going to leave that empty. We can, of course, assign a color to our status. This is also going to change the markup's color. When a status is assigned to a markup, its color will change. This can be useful or not useful, but depending on your workflow. I'm going to leave it on because I think it's pretty cool. And when something is approved, I think I'm going to give it the green light. So we'll do a slightly darker green than usual. Very good. Then we're going to add another one. And let's say that we are going to have a denied status, for example, or even better, please revise. And so the color for that one, perhaps we want to give it a yellow right here, so we can do that. And let's do one more. Why not, denied, because, maybe it can't be revised, maybe it needs to be, or, let's go one step further. Please remove. That's even better. And we'll make that one red. I'll use the brighter red right here. Perfect. And now all of our statuses are ready to go in our custom state models section of statuses. Quite interesting way of organizing things. Now, we have some special things that we can do here. We can set a default model. That means that when we apply statuses, it's not going to do any of the default ones that come with Bluebeam Revu, such as review and migration, for example. It's going to basically allow us to use these statuses first. So the site logistics one is going to be our default. And then which state should be the default when a status is assigned. We could do that to save an extra click, or we can make sure that we manually set our state. So default can be left empty, or we can essentially choose a default if we wanted to. I'm going to leave it empty. It's much more useful to do that. Give me 1 second, ladies and gentlemen. All right. Excuse me for that. I just had to freshen up a little. All right. So what is really cool about statuses is once we select them here, we do have the option to save them to profile. So this is quite useful. Now the statuses are set to the profile, but still we need to make sure that each PDF that basically we want to put into Studio, make sure you open the PDF as a local file first, make sure the statuses are set, and then once you upload that PDF to Studio projects or basically Studio sessions, which is where it's used much more often, then you'll be able to utilize those custom statuses there. Now I'm going to click OK, and we're good to go. So let's say I wanted to assign a status on a local file, for example, which is not as useful as in Studio. I can click on our markup, and then I can right-click on it, mouse over, set status right here, go into our little section here, and we have our 3 choices. So the markup is magenta right now. Let's see if I say, please revise. Oh my God, it's so hard to read. It's a little bit too bright. So it looks like I need to modify the color of that status. So I'll quickly make that change right now. So let's manage that. And let's see if it's actually going to dynamically change the color. So we're going to click on please revise, modify. This yellow is way too bright. Perhaps orange will be better. Orange happens to be my favorite color too. So we'll click OK. And the status color did not change on this one, because now that when we select this, we can see that the status here, I'm going to expand the column so you can see more details here. It has a very specific date and time. Therefore, whatever the settings were used when setting the status, and then you go and you change those settings afterwards, it's not going to affect any existing statuses of the same name. So now, how can we fix this? Well, we just set another status. Now, I believe that we can actually double click in the statuses column right here, and then we can get here a little bit quicker than having to right click on top of the markup. And now I'm going to, let's see if I click on please revise again, what's going to happen? There we go. Now it's the color orange, much easier to read. And we have a new status here. This area is going to start to fill up with more statuses as people basically say, this is approved, or please revise, or please remove, etc., etc. So that's essentially how this works. And that status is in a nutshell. So we've got them all set up and ready to go. We have plenty of time now to showcase how statuses work in Studio, and I'm also going to give a nice little tutorial on how to use Studio as a whole. So I'm going to save my work, which is very important. And then this file, I need to import this specific file into my Studio session. To access Studio, we can go to the little house icon right here. This is the Studio panel. And I've already been signed in because I'm using Bluebeam Revu 21, and I had to basically access or activate my program by signing in and having a license assigned to us. So I already have one. my plan here is complete. It looks like they changed it from package to plan, which I quite like. So I can utilize all the features in Bluebeam Revu right here. And because of the fact that we signed into the program here, it signs us in automatically into Studio. I can always sign out manually by clicking on the Studio dropdown and clicking out sign out right here. So that's a very interesting way of doing things, and it does save a lot of time. Now that I'm here, we have two tabs next to the Studio dropdown. The first one is for projects. This is using a check-in, check-out system and is good for archiving. And just like we know in the presentation, let me swap back to it and show you all. We can basically, make sure that job site safety is enhanced by archiving anything that is essentially a milestone or that has been finalized into Studio projects. That's its main purpose. And then Studio Sessions is great for real-time collaboration with current documents, and we can call it the central PDF, so to speak. So everybody can work on that PDF together, and there's no need to send emails or save anything. Basically, it's really all on the cloud and accessible by anybody at almost any time. The admin, of course, can change that with different security permissions. So let me briefly show you all how projects works. The project panel is active right here. It looks like a little chalkboard that's stuck to the wall, which represents how projects is a check-in, check-out system that requires a dedicated internet connection and is really good for archiving, not incredible for working on collaboratively, because only one person can work on a file at once. I'm going to go into this project for presentations. And I have my local file right here. I'm going to close it. And when I get into my session, I'm going to upload it so that we can see how those statuses work and how we cannot modify existing statuses in a session. So we'll get into that a little bit later. I'm also going to collapse my properties panel on the right side. Now we have a lot more viewing space. So here is my project. I've already uploaded some files here. If I wanted to add more, I can click on add on the upper right. I can upload not only files, but groups of files inside of a folder. So upload folder is quite nice. And what's nice about projects is you can organize your files into actual folders in the project. You can also upload different kinds of files. So it doesn't have to be a PDF. It could be a Word document. It could be CAD or BIM files, etc., etc. So I'm going to go and let's go into this structural folder. I can click on the drop-down arrow next to it, and I have this file inside of it, so I'm just going to double-click in it. If you see a folder that doesn't have an arrow next to it, that means the folder is empty. So this RFI one is empty. So now I'm going to make my project pane a little smaller so that I can see clearly now the rain is gone, as they say. And I'm just going to adjust this a little. And here is our file. I can tell that this is a file in Studio Projects because the icon next to the file's name is a lock icon. So if I try to take this markup, this check that I made several times, I can right click on top of it and I can't do anything. All I can really do is look at its properties, which is kind of useful. It opens up the properties panel. But in the properties panel, I can't modify anything either. Instead, I can try and make a markup, but I can't make any markups either. I can't even insert images, although I can at least go to the little extension window. So how do I make changes to this file? Well, it's time to check it out. There's a few ways to do it. You can click on the lock icon right here and click on checkout. You can also right click on top of the file in the project panel, and checkout is available along with download copy, etc. Now there is a very special button here called add to new session. This is verbatim exactly what it does. You can add one file at a time to a new session, not an existing one. So hopefully Bluebeam will implement the ability to add files from projects to an existing session and add multiple if we wanted to. So one of my clients asked me about that. So I'm just going to click on the lock icon here and check it out. I'm going to check out this file, as they say. And now the file icon up here is a little bit different. It shows a piece of paper instead of the lock. This means that I checked out of the file. If you see the silhouette of a person up here, that means that someone else that's been invited to my project has checked out of the file. Now I can select this markup here. The grips are not gray anymore, they're blue. I can right click and I can make changes to it if I want to, including delete. And then what I can do is I can make a new markup. So I'm going to look for my highlight tool. Here it is. And I'm going to make a nice check. I like to make little orange checks. It's my trademark at this point. So now that I'm done making changes to this drawing, I have a few options. I can click on the icon next to the name once again, and I can check it back in, which is kind of like saving and quitting. And update server copy is just like saving. So I can update the server copy so other people can see the work that I've done, but I can continue to keep the file checked out and continue to work on it. So that's a great way to save as you go, as they say, and it's not a bad idea to do that periodically. So we're going to check it back in. We are done working. I'm going to type revision 42. because I like to make the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy joke. It is a fun little joke. And then I'm going to check and see how many other people have checked the file in or even moved it from one folder to another. We can do that by going to the lock icon up here and clicking on revision history. When it comes to job site safety, it's important to know who's working on what, because if somebody made a change and didn't notify anybody about it, that change could affect people on site. So you want to be very careful. So in Studio Projects, you can only see when people check in a file and when a file was moved. You cannot see when they checked it out. So this is a good example of why Studio Projects has basically some useful things, but it does have limitations. And this is where Studio Sessions is the other side of the same coin, as they say. And you can also see I've made the same silly comments of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy for quite some time. I believe since maybe about 2 years ago. Yep, about March of 2021. So I'm going to close out of the revision history section. This is a brief overview of Studio Projects. The last thing I'll show you all here is the settings section, because I want you all to see the differences between the settings and how you can start to consider what kinds of settings in projects will be useful and what settings in sessions will be even more useful. And I'll show you why right now. The general session is pretty obvious. We can change the project name at any time. And this project ID, you can see it here, and you can see it next to my project here. If I go to user access and I had restrict attendees or restrict users in this case turned off, that means that anyone watching this presentation can use this 9-digit code. They can click on the plus sign right here and they can join this project right now. So luckily you guys cannot. I have made sure of that. So I can then go to the permission section right here and I can check and see what my attendees are allowed to do. This is the important distinction between projects and sessions because the settings are very different for both of them. So you can see that all attendees are allowed to share file links, and that's about it. And there is no way to stop them from saving files to their computer. In Studio Sessions there is, which is great. So that is a bit of an issue, but there is kind of a way to stop them from saving files out, and I'll show you how in just a second. Now you can see that I've actually added one of my attendees into a specific group by himself. So this is Alan. He's the guy who demoed us and gave us the lovely intro in the beginning of this presentation. And I trust him so much. I've known him for a while. So I've given him full permission to do a lot of things here. So it's fantastic, and you can choose who can do what. The same thing is true of the folder permissions section. And this is where you can basically allow people to either just look at PDFs and not be able to check them out. Checking them out is the same thing as writing. So read write allows people to check things in and out. And of course, delete implies that you can allow people to delete files if you wanted to. And Alan, I trust him so much, he can do it. And Raquel as well. I think they're swell people. So that's essentially the security permissions for projects. Keep these permissions in the permission section in mind, and you'll see how different they are in Studio Sessions. So if I made changes, I can click apply. I did not, so I'm just going to cancel. And I'm going to close out of my project file and the projects panel. Now let's look at Studio Sessions. This is the moment you've all been waiting for, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to be going to Studio Sessions. This is the exciting part, because now we're going to work on the same PDF at the same time. So here I am, rocking like a hurricane, as they say. And in the join section, you can see my name in the online section, and my other colleagues are essentially offline, and that's okay. So it looks like Alan was actually working with me when we were at that convention, and we were using statuses. These are another set of statuses, not to be confused with the ones that we just worked on earlier. So you can actually set your own personal user status, so to speak, right here. And so the user status can be changed at any time. So we were just saying hi to our convention people. I'm going to say hi, everyone, just to make it a bit more general. Let me uppercase the E, and then just press enter. And now my status has changed. So people can see what I'm doing, and the status is a great way to quickly tell people what your intentions are and what you're trying to do. So that's fantastic. So this status is one kind of status. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you all the document section, and this is where we can now upload files and even open existing ones. So this is one of my older example floor plans. I'm going to upload the one that we just added those really awesome statuses to. So don't mind me. I'm going to put this on my other monitor, although I don't mind sharing some things with you all. And I'm just going to look for my file, make sure that I've got the right one. I believe it is, let me sort it by date modified. There it is. I modified it quite recently. Very good. So I'm going to click on open. And now it's going to appear right on the screen. Not quite. It's actually going to appear in the document section, which just flashed orange momentarily. And now I have my files here. They're sorted by alphabetical order. They can also be sorted by dates. So you can click on this AZ symbol and do it either way. So here is my October file. I'm going to double click on it. And here we are. Now we have our file. We can tell that it's a studio session file because it has the sessions icon here. Now, does that mean that if I make changes to this file, that my local file that I was just working on is also going to have the same changes? And the answer is no. We made a copy of that file. The big difference you'll notice is my signature fields are actually kind of gone. You can see the red X for them, so they still exist. And basically, you're not really able to sign files in Studio Sessions, which makes a lot of sense. It's on the cloud, it's not really secure, etc., etc. And other form fields cannot really be used. So these numbers up here are actually part of form fields that I created in order to basically automatically use 2 and 4 fields, add them together. So when the numbers change, you can add them equal another form field. So I did 12 plus 20 equals 32. It's pretty cool. So this is a session file. This is a copy of my local file. And now it's time to get really into it. So status time. I'm now going to open up my markups list once again. I'm going to go to the status section. I'm going to click on the settings for it and manage statuses grayed out. So you need to set up your statuses ahead of time before you upload a file to a session. If you need to make changes to the settings of a status and the colors and other things, all you have to do is save the file out. So you can use save as right here, and then basically make your changes, re-upload it to the session. No big deal, but let's hope that you set your statuses up perfectly before you upload the file to the session. So what is great is that I can still utilize the statuses that I made, not to be confused with the personal status, but these are more markup statuses. Let's do that once again. I'm going to click on this one that we set statuses for earlier, and look at that. The statuses that were set in the local file are still there, so they never go away, which is great. Let me take another one of my markups. I think I'm going to do this length tool right here. Why not? Maybe this length is incorrect and we need to specify something. So I'm going to right click on top of it, set status, and now I can essentially go to my status section. Let's say that I want someone to remove it completely. We already have a length there. We don't need to have an extra one. We've already proven that it works. So please remove. And there it is. It is now the color red instead of the typical color magenta that I use for most of my annotations. And that's basically how statuses work. And you can see here that the status has been set. And it says my name and the date and the time, just like I mentioned earlier. So statuses are a great way to really make sure that people are keeping track of everything. Speaking of which, how else can we keep track of things when we're in studio sessions? Because the markups list is one thing, but something that Studio Projects does not have is the records list right here. This list is incredible because every single thing that happens in a session has been kept track of. So let me make my markups list a little smaller so that you guys can see more records, because I want to show you all what's going on here. So basically, back in, let's see, oh yes, about a couple weeks ago, I was in the session, but I left it. I left it on basically October 5th. And then today, I just joined it now. After I joined it, I set my status, my personal status, of course. And then I added the file. And then I just set a state as whatever the state's name is, which happens to be please remove. So that's essentially the difference between the statuses up here and then states, which are used for markups. But statuses and states is all kind of interchangeable. So anyway, now you will also notice that existing markups that are uploaded to Studio Sessions cannot be modified. Bluebeam did this on purpose because they want us to be able to keep track of everything that's done. And because these markups were made before being uploaded to the session, we can't really track them properly. We don't have all of that data and all that history. This is okay because I know a lot of people that say, well, I need to be able to put them in sessions and I need to be able to, make some modifications to them. How do I do it? All you need to do is take your local file with all the markups, select them all. You can use this select tool right here and just make a big box around them. You can even go one step further and you can go into your markups list, select the first markup, scroll all the way down on the right side, hold the shift key and select all the other ones. Because if you have 10 pages full of markups, it'll be hard to just select one page and then boom. However, once you do this, you'll want to use paste in place. Paste in place works per page. So what I would do is I would go one page at a time. It doesn't take too long to do this. Even if you have 100 pages, you'll be done in a few minutes. Just select all your markups, right click, and then copy them. It's not going to work here because these are locked and I'm in the session now. But if this was a local file, copy would be available. And then when I'm ready, paste in place is a button that I've customized and added right up here. I've done other presentations and tutorials on this, but really quickly, I can go to Tools, Toolbars, Customize, and I can go to my edit toolbar, see if paste in place exists. I'll pretend that it doesn't because it does not exist by default. Then I would go to the edit category on the upper left side and go to paste in place, use the arrow between the items and the commands and add it. And then I can reorder it and put it right back. So that's how we can add really, really useful things such as save as and paste in place, even the comparison and overlay tools. They're all customized and added by me because they are not there by default. Anyway, paste in place is great because it'll paste all the markups in the same locations. So all you have to do, select each page, copy, and then go into your session and then paste, and you'll be done relatively soon. Regardless, hopefully you're making your markups in the session and that you're uploading PDFs without them. That is typically the case. So let's see what happens when we create markups here. Good, we're making great timing. So I'm going to show you all how we can communicate in sessions while we're making markups. So if I make a markup, such as this line tool, you'll see a little red dot is going to appear, disappear very quickly on the bottom right side, starting now. And there it is. Oh, we have a pretty good internet connection, and that's how fast it took for the markup to be live on the session so that other people can see it. Then, with any markup that either exists or a markup that I just made, either way is fine, I can right-click on them, and I have replies. However, you'll see that the alert button is not here for existing markups. For a new markup, if I right-click on top of it, I have alert attendee. So alert attendee is very useful for markups that are created in the session. And it's a great way to alert people that there is something that needs to be addressed. Now, how do they know what needs to be addressed? Well, that's where the reply comes in. So we're going to make the reply first. I'm going to click on reply. A little white box appears on the bottom of my screen. I'm going to make sure to type in, please make this green, my second favorite color. And I'm going to press the escape key. Now that I'm done, the record has updated. It shows when I added the line and when I started to make the reply. What if I move the line? No problem. I just moved the line. And I'm not going to do it now, but you can take my word for it. Actually, I will do it with another markup just to demonstrate. If I make a markup and then I delete it, it is also in the records list. So this specific line that I just made was deleted at this day and this time. This is going to be really good for improving job site logistics and making sure that everything is kept track of very nice and neatly. Now, let's learn more about replies. You can see that there's now a new icon on the bottom right side of this markup, which essentially when I mouse over it shows me what I wrote for the reply. If I click on it, it opens up the markups list, selects the markup, and the reply is indented to the right below it. And in the comment section, we can see the same text that I wrote, which I can always double click on and change at any time. This is great. Now I can also assign a status to this. Let's do that. Why not? I'm actually in the middle of reviewing it. So I actually need someone to please revise this, please. We need to make it green. Good. And it was already the color orange. So oops. Oh, well, bad example, but that's okay. So now what I'm going to do is use alerts. So I can right click on top of this line, mouse over alert attendee, and then choose. And it's important to set your replies first because they're like a set of instructions, and then alert people. So I can alert Alan, my colleague. I'm not going to do it because he's a little bit busy in our presentation right now. So I'm not going to bother him. But let's say that Alan alerted me. I'm going to show you because he has in the past. And I can go to my notification sections right here, and he would have an alert from me if I did notify him. Here's one from Alan that he sent. And if I click on this, it's going to open whatever file I was alerted in. So it opened another file that he alerted me to in the past, and it's going to center myself around that markup. Now, with the file open, if I click on the alert or another alert again, now you can see that basically this first one, it deselects the markup because there was a markup here that he alerted me to, and that markup was deleted. So it'll still take me to the location, but if the markup doesn't exist, it's not going to be selected. This alert down here will select the markup because this one was not deleted by him. So this is a great alert. And so as a result, if he alerts me, that must mean that there must be a reply because Alan's trained in the use of Bluebeam Revu, right? So I can scroll down a little bit and we can see our replies right here. So when Alan said, please verify, I jokingly said, I'll verify this later. And then he said, thanks, I'll keep an eye out. And what he did is he replied to my reply, and he also replied to the markup itself. This is why this one is indented too much, and this one is indented to the same level as this one. So very interesting how that works and how replies can be replies of replies of replies until the end of time. So that's how we can communicate and basically make sure that anytime we request that something get done, We don't have to send a phone call and rely on people to just take our word for it. And if someone asks, oh, you didn't tell me to do something. Oh, I sure did. I sent you a reply, or I created a reply and I sent you an alert in Studio Sessions, and it's all in that records list. And that records list is set in stone. Nobody can really delete things from it. So, all right. Well, that's Studio Sessions in a nutshell. I did say that there were some settings in Studio Sessions that are very different from projects. We have a bit of time, so I'm going to show how they work right now. I'm going to click on the session settings icon. There we go. And you can see that same abacus slider that we saw for managing our statuses as well. So the same button is used in projects, sessions, and for statuses. So here we can see that we do have some generic information here. We can go to our attendee section and see who's allowed to join. Restrict attendees instead of restrict users. There's a little caveat to that. Users is in projects and attendees are in sessions. So a little bit different, but the same concept. And permissions. Here, you can see that the permissions are very different from projects. We can stop people from saving files out of a session just by making save as denied if we wanted to. We can prevent them from printing. And if we don't want them to make any markups or send alerts, then we don't have to worry. We can deny them as well. Every markup alert, if you're not currently working in a session and someone alerts you, that alert is going to basically translate to an email that will be sent to you automatically. So if you're getting too many of those, there's two ways to, of course, manage them. You can either make all alerts go away, or you can go to general and manage your notifications and make sure that you just don't get them personally for yourself. So, and then adding documents. You may not want every attendee to add documents, so you can prevent them from doing so right here. And like you saw in projects, certain attendees can have certain permissions. Because I trust Alan, he can do everything. He's got full control. And that's it, ladies and gents. That is essentially our presentation today on how you can use Bluebeam Revu for site logistics in a nutshell. Does anybody have any questions?
Okay, thanks so much, Ari. That was great. Okay, so we've got a couple questions here. Remember, if anybody does have any additional questions, we've got a few minutes here. Go ahead and send those over in the questions box or chat box. The first one I see here, Ari, is can I make a measurement that is 1-to-1 and does not have a scale?
Yes, good question. So yes, I will show you how that works. And we talked about it a little bit earlier, but I'm going to demonstrate it now. I'm going to open up a local file since these sessions files can be a little bit finicky when it comes to that, but they still will work with that. And what we can do now is we can go to the measurements panel, go to the custom section, and all we have to do is say that 1 inch equals 1 inch as well. And that's how we can set it to 1-to-1. Initially, it'll change the number here to 12 inches because it thinks that we're doing something weird. That's okay. We want to set it to 1, and we're going to brute force it. Now I can just click inside of an empty area here, and there it is, 1-to-1. And look at that. All of our measurements here have now changed their data significantly. And I actually use this in order to measure how large my seal is when I'm digitally signing and sealing. So if I wanted to now, I can check and make sure that it's a little bit over 2 inches. It should be 1 7/8 minimum. And there it is. We're at about 2 1/16, if not a little larger, which is fantastic. So we've done it. That's exactly how we can set our scale to 1-to-1. So excellent question.
All right, perfect. Okay, another question here. How do I change a status color of the markup in Studio Sessions?
Oh, yes, that's a fun question. So like I mentioned earlier, we cannot. The answer is it is not possible. Because there is actually a caveat to that. Obviously, you can set statuses in a studio session. So I'm going to open up the example floor plan that we uploaded to the session here. And of course, I can change the color of a markup by assigning it to a different status. So I'm going to assign this one to approved, for example. Now it's green. But if you wanted to change the actual color associated with a state, you're going to need to do that with the local file. So now in my local file that's not in sessions, I can go to the statuses section, click on manage statuses or the settings button for statuses, then manage status. And now I can go into here and start changing things. So site logistics, and I can change my colors to whatever I want by clicking on modify. And here is where the color is. So yes, very nice question. And yes, it is good that we followed up on that.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so I think that's all our questions for now. So Ari, if you can jump over to that next slide, we'll do our closing thoughts here. So thank you all for being here today. Thank you, Ari, for presenting. That was a great presentation. Just a couple quick notes here. So our blog is live. You can check that out at the URL on the screen. It's going to be all kinds of tips and tricks videos, things like that on there. and it's a great resource. So definitely do check that out. Again, as I mentioned, we do have training options available for Bluebeam, so reach out to us if you're interested in some of that. And you can also actually find a free trial of Bluebeam, a 30-day trial on our website, which is going to be ddscad.com. And again, last thing, any questions, concerns, anything like that, give us a call at 305-445-6480 or shoot us an email at info@ddscad.com. Thank you all for being here.
Thanks, everybody.